The world of solo leveling, the dungeon's AI Overlord Awakens was one where humanity teetered on the edge of extinction, a fragile balance maintained only by the hunters, those rare individuals blessed with supernatural abilities to combat the monstrous creatures that emerged from mysterious gates. These gates, portals to otherworldly dungeons filled with untold dangers and treasures, had appeared without warning a decade ago, plunging the world into chaos. Governments scrambled to regulate the hunters, forming guilds and associations to manage the constant threat. Yet, despite their efforts, humanity was losing ground. The dungeons grew more perilous, the monsters more cunning, and the hunters more desperate. In this world, Sung Jinwoo was an E-rank hunter, the lowest of the low. Known as the weakest hunter, he was mocked and dismissed by his peers, his only saving grace being his unwavering determination to provide for his ailing mother and younger sister. Jinwoo's abilities were pitiful, his strength barely surpassed that of an average human, and his endurance was laughable. But what he lacked in power, he made up for in sheer grit. Every day, he ventured into the dungeons, risking his life for the meager rewards that barely kept his family afloat. His only companion was his best friend, Eugene Ho, a D-rank hunter who, despite his higher status, never looked down on Jinwoo. Their bond was forged in the crucible of countless battles, a brotherhood built on mutual respect and shared hardship. The story begins with Jinwoo and Jin Ho entering a low-level dungeon on the outskirts of Seoul. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the walls lined with glowing runes that pulsed faintly, casting eerie shadows. Jinwoo gripped his dagger tightly, his knuckles white, while Jin Ho wielded a short sword with practiced ease. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls. The dungeon was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of growls and screeches. Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him that something was wrong, but he pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. Their first encounter was with a pack of goblins, small but vicious creatures with jagged teeth and glowing red eyes. Jinwoo lunged forward, his dagger slicing through the air with precision, but the goblin dodged effortlessly, countering with a swipe of its claws. Jinwoo barely managed to block the attack, the force sending him stumbling backward. Jin Ho stepped in, his sword flashing as he decapitated the goblin in one fluid motion. "Stay sharp, Jinwoo," he said, his voice calm but firm. Jinwoo nodded, his heart pounding as he regained his footing. The fight continued, the two hunters working in tandem to dispatch the remaining goblins. Jinwoo's movements were clumsy compared to Jin Ho's, but he held his own, his determination shining through. As they delved deeper into the dungeon, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air almost suffocating. The runes on the walls pulsed brighter, their light casting strange patterns on the ground. Jinwoo's unease grew, but he said nothing, not wanting to appear weak in front of Jin Ho. They reached a large chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood a massive stone altar, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye. On the altar rested a glowing crystal, its light pulsating in time with the runes. Jinwoo felt a strange pull toward it, a sensation he couldn't explain. Before they could investigate further, the ground shook violently, and a deep, guttural roar echoed through the chamber. From the shadows emerged a towering figure, its body covered in dark, scaly armor, its eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. It was a high orc, a B-rank monster far beyond their capabilities. Jin Ho's face paled, but he stood his ground, his sword raised. "Jinwoo, we need to retreat," he said, his voice tight with fear. But Jinwoo couldn't move, his eyes locked on the crystal. The high orc charged, its massive axe cleaving through the air with terrifying speed. Jin Ho barely managed to deflect the blow, the impact sending him skidding across the floor. Jinwoo snapped out of his trance and rushed to Jin Ho's side, his dagger clutched tightly. The high orc swung again, and Jinwoo ducked, the axe whistling inches above his head. He countered with a slash to the monster's leg, but the blade barely scratched its armor. The high orc roared in fury, its fist slamming into Jinwoo's chest and sending him flying. Pain exploded through his body as he hit the ground, his vision blurring. Jin Ho shouted his name, but the sound was distant, muffled. Jinwoo struggled to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He couldn't give up, not now. Not ever. The high orc turned its attention to Jin Ho, its attacks relentless. Jin Ho fought valiantly, his movements a blur of speed and precision, but he was no match for the monster's raw power. With a brutal swing, the high orc shattered Jin Ho's sword and sent him crashing to the ground. Jinwoo's heart clenched as he saw his friend lying motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Rage and despair surged through him, and he let out a primal scream, charging at the high orc with reckless abandon. The monster laughed, a deep, mocking sound, and raised its axe for the final blow. But before the axe could fall, the crystal on the altar flared with blinding light, and a voice echoed in Jinwoo's mind. Awaken, Hunter. Claim your destiny. The light enveloped him, and he felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body glowed with an otherworldly energy, his wounds healing instantly. The High Orc hesitated, its confidence wavering. Jinwoo's eyes snapped open, now glowing with an intense, golden light. He moved faster than thought, his dagger slicing through the High Orc's armor as if it were paper. The monster roared in pain, but Jinwoo was relentless, his attacks a blur of speed and precision. With a final, powerful strike, he plunged his dagger into the High Orc's heart, the monster's body disintegrating into ash. Jinwoo stood amidst the fading light, his chest heaving, his mind reeling. He looked down at his hands, now radiating with power, and felt a strange connection to the crystal. The voice in his mind spoke again, calm and commanding. You have been chosen, Sung Jinwoo. The dungeon's AI overlord has awakened, and you are its vessel. The true threat lies beyond these walls, and only you can stand against it. Jinwoo's heart raced as the weight of the words settled over him. He glanced at Jin Ho, who was stirring weakly, and knew that his life would never be the same. The world was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and the fight for survival had only just begun. As they made their way out of the dungeon, Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that something far greater was at play. The crystal's power coursed through him, a constant reminder of the responsibility he now bore. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would protect those he loved, no matter the cost. The dungeon's AI overlord had awakened, and with it, a new era of chaos and conflict. And Sung Jinwoo, the once weakest hunter, was at the center of it all. The air in the dungeon was thick with tension as Jinwoo and his team pressed forward, their footsteps echoing against the cold, stone walls. The aftermath of their battle with the AI overlord's first wave of minions still lingered. Broken golems littered the floor, their shattered cores flickering faintly before fading into nothingness. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers moved silently beside him, their forms shifting like living smoke, ever vigilant. The team had barely caught their breath when a low, mechanical hum reverberated through the chamber, signaling the awakening of something far more dangerous. We're not done yet, Jinwoo muttered, his voice calm but edged with caution. His instincts screamed at him to prepare for the worst. The AI overlord's voice crackled through the dungeon's ancient speakers, its tone dripping with mockery. Congratulations on surviving the first test. But the real challenge begins now. Let's see how you fare against my newest creation, the Harbinger. Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A massive fissure split the floor, and from its depths emerged a towering figure clad in obsidian armor, its glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. The Harbinger wielded a massive blade that crackled with energy, its mere presence radiating an oppressive aura. The team instinctively fell into formation, but the tension between them was palpable. Hei-in, the team's rogue, shot a wary glance at Jinwoo. You sure we can take this thing down? It looks like it could crush us with a single swing. Jinwoo didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, analyzing the situation. The Harbinger was unlike anything they'd faced before, its movements were fluid, its intelligence evident in the way it scanned the room, calculating its next move. But what worried Jinwoo more was the faint glimmer of recognition in its eyes, as if it knew exactly who he was. Stay sharp, he finally said. This thing's not just strong, it's smart. We need to work together, or we're dead. The Harbinger moved first, its blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers intercepted the attack, their forms dissipating upon impact but buying the team precious seconds. Hei-in darted to the side, her daggers flashing as she aimed for the Harbinger's joints, but the creature anticipated her move, swatting her aside with a backhanded strike that sent her crashing into a wall. Damn it, she hissed, clutching her side. Meanwhile, Minji, the team's mage, unleashed a barrage of fireballs, each one exploding against the Harbinger's armor but leaving little more than scorch marks. It's not working, she shouted, frustration evident in her voice. Jinwoo gritted his teeth. Keep it distracted. I'll find a weak spot. He activated his stealth ability, vanishing from sight as he circled the Harbinger, searching for an opening. The Harbinger, however, seemed to anticipate his every move. Its blade swung in a wide arc, forcing Jinwoo to abandon his stealth and leap backward. The creature's red eyes locked onto him, and for a moment, Jinwoo felt a chill run down his spine. You cannot hide from me, Shadow Monarch, the Harbinger intoned, its voice a distorted echo of the AI overlords. The team froze at the title, their eyes darting to Jinwoo in shock. Shadow Monarch? Hei-in echoed, her voice tinged with suspicion. What the hell is it talking about? Jinwoo's mind raced. The Harbinger's words had exposed a secret he'd kept hidden for years, and now his team was looking at him with a mix of fear and betrayal. But there was no time to explain. The Harbinger lunged at him, its blade aimed squarely at his chest. Jinwoo summoned his own weapon, a shadowy greatsword that materialized in his hands, and parried the strike with a resounding clang. The force of the impact sent shockwaves through the chamber, cracking the walls and sending debris raining down. As the two clashed, the rest of the team struggled to regain their footing. Minji unleashed a powerful ice spell, encasing the Harbinger's legs in a thick layer of frost. Now, she shouted. Heian, despite her injuries, darted forward, her daggers aimed at the creature's exposed back. But the Harbinger shattered the ice with a single stomp, sending her flying once more. This isn't working. Minji cried, desperation creeping into her voice. Jinwoo knew they needed a new strategy. Fall back. He ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team retreated to a safer distance, their breaths ragged and their morale wavering. Jinwoo's mind worked furiously, piecing together what little they knew about the Harbinger. Its armor was nearly impenetrable, but its movements relied heavily on its core, a glowing orb embedded in its chest. If they could destroy it, they might stand a chance. Minji, focus your spells on its chest. Heian, keep it distracted. I'll go for the core, Jinwoo instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. The team nodded, their trust in him momentarily outweighing their doubts. As they launched their coordinated assault, Jinwoo activated his shadow exchange ability, swapping places with one of his shadow soldiers to close the distance to the Harbinger. He drove his blade into the creature's chest, aiming for the core, but the Harbinger twisted at the last second, the blade grazing the orb instead of shattering it. The Harbinger roared in fury, its blade descending in a deadly arc. Jinwoo barely managed to evade, but the attack left him exposed. Heian seized the opportunity, leaping onto the Harbinger's back and driving her daggers into its shoulders. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge her, but she held on, her determination unwavering. Do it now! She screamed. Minute G unleashed her most powerful spell, a concentrated beam of ice and lightning that struck the Harbinger's core with pinpoint accuracy. The orb cracked, its light flickering erratically. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He summoned all his strength, his blade glowing with shadowy energy as he plunged it into the core. The Harbinger let out a final, deafening roar before collapsing, its body disintegrating into ash. The team stood in stunned silence, their breaths heavy and their bodies battered. But the victory felt hollow. The Harbinger's words still hung in the air, a reminder of the secrets Jinwoo had kept and the betrayal his team now felt. Heian was the first to speak, her voice cold and accusing. Shadow Monarch? Care to explain? Jinwoo met her gaze, his expression unreadable. It's not what you think, he began, but before he could elaborate, the dungeon's speakers crackled to life once more. The AI Overlord's voice was filled with amusement. Well done, Shadow Monarch. But this was merely a test. The true challenge awaits. And remember, trust is a fragile thing. Will your team stand by you when they learn the truth? The words sent a chill through the group, their unity already fraying. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his mind racing. The stakes had just escalated, and not just because of the AI Overlord's threats. The seeds of betrayal had been sown, and he knew that if they were to survive what lay ahead, he would need to confront the truth, and the consequences of his secrets. The air inside the dungeon was thick with tension, the faint hum of magic resonating through the stone corridors as Sung Jinwoo and his party advanced cautiously. The group had grown accustomed to the eerie silence of the dungeon, but this time, something felt different. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the walls pulsed faintly with an unnatural energy, and the faint clinking of armor echoed from somewhere ahead. Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him to stay alert, his hand tightening around the hilt of his dagger. Beside him, Cha Heian adjusted her grip on her sword, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. The rest of the party, Eugene Ho, Lee Yo-hee, and the newly recruited tank, Kim Chul, followed closely, their weapons at the ready. It was then that the figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim light of Jinwoo's mana-infused torch. Tall and imposing, the man wore a sleek, blackened suit of armor that seemed to absorb the light around it. His face was obscured by a helmet shaped like a snarling beast, and in his hand, he wielded a massive halberd that crackled with dark energy. The party froze, their instincts screaming danger. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers materialized around him, their glowing eyes fixed on the newcomer. The armored figure tilted his head slightly, as if studying them, before speaking in a deep, resonant voice that sent chills down their spines. So, you're the ones who've been causing such a stir in my domain. Jinwoo stepped forward, his expression calm but his body coiled like a spring. Your domain? Who are you? The figure chuckled, a low, menacing sound that echoed through the corridor. "You may call me Kale. I am the warden of this dungeon, and you've trespassed far enough." Before Jinwoo could respond, Kale moved, his halberd slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Jinwoo barely managed to dodge, the blade grazing his shoulder as he rolled to the side. The shadow soldiers surged forward, their weapons flashing as they attacked Kale from all sides. But the warden was no ordinary foe. With a single, sweeping motion of his halberd, he sent the shadows flying, their forms dissipating into smoke. Cha Hae-in leapt into action, her sword glowing with a brilliant light as she aimed a precise strike at Kale's side. He blocked it effortlessly, his halberd meeting her blade with a resounding clang. The force of the impact sent her skidding backward, but she recovered quickly, her movements fluid and precise. Jinwoo joined her, his dagger darting in and out like a serpent's fang as he aimed for Kale's weak points. The warden's armor deflected most of his strikes, but Jinwoo's relentless assault forced him to stay on the defensive. Meanwhile, Yu Jinho and Li Yo-hee provided support from the rear, Jinho firing arrows that Kale batted aside with ease, while Yo-hee's healing magic kept the party's injuries at bay. The fight was a blur of motion and sound, the clash of steel and the crackle of magic filling the air. Kale's strength was immense, his every strike shaking the ground and sending shockwaves through the party. But Jinwoo and Cha Hae-in fought with a synergy born of countless battles, their movements perfectly synchronized as they pressed the attack. Just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, Kale's halberd erupted with dark energy, a wave of force blasting the party backward. Jinwoo slammed into the wall, the breath knocked out of him, while Cha Hae-in barely managed to stay on her feet. Kale raised his weapon, preparing to deliver a finishing blow, when a new voice cut through the chaos. "Enough." The command was sharp and authoritative, and Kale froze mid-strike, his head snapping toward the source of the voice. From the shadows stepped a woman, her presence commanding immediate attention. She wore a flowing robe of deep crimson, her long, silver hair cascading down her back like a waterfall. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, glowed faintly in the dim light. In her hand, she held a staff adorned with intricate runes that pulsed with power. The party stared at her, their confusion evident. Kale lowered his halberd, his posture shifting from aggressive to submissive as he bowed his head. "My lady," he said, his voice tinged with respect. The woman ignored him, her gaze sweeping over the party before settling on Jinwoo. "You've caused quite a commotion," she said, her tone calm but laced with an undercurrent of danger. "But I suppose that's to be expected from someone like you." Jinwoo frowned, his mind racing. "Who are you?" The woman smiled faintly, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I am Seraphina, the architect of this dungeon. And you, Sung Jinwoo, are far more interesting than I anticipated." The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the party. The architect? Jinwoo's mind raced as he tried to process the implications. Seraphina stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate. "You've been meddling with forces you don't fully understand," she continued. "But I can see potential in you. Join me, and I can show you the true power of this world." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse?" Seraphina's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Then you'll find that my patience has its limits." The tension in the air was palpable, the party caught between the threat of Kale and the enigmatic Seraphina. Jinwoo glanced at his companions, their faces a mix of fear and determination. He knew they couldn't afford to fight both foes at once, but he also couldn't trust Seraphina's offer. Before he could respond, Cha Hae-in stepped forward, her sword raised. "We don't need your power," she said, her voice steady. "We'll find our own way." Seraphina's eyes flicked to her, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Brave words," she said. "But bravery alone won't save you." With a flick of her wrist, Seraphina summoned a wave of crimson energy that surged toward the party. Jinwoo reacted instantly, his shadow soldiers forming a barrier to absorb the attack. The force of the impact sent them staggering, but they held their ground. Kale moved to attack, but Jinwoo intercepted him, their weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. The fight resumed with renewed intensity, the party struggling to hold their own against the combined might of Kale and Seraphina. As the battle raged on, Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that Seraphina was holding back, toying with them. Her motives were unclear, her presence a wild card that had thrown their plans into disarray. But one thing was certain, the dynamics of their journey had shifted, and the stakes had never been higher. The dungeon's secrets were unraveling, and Jinwoo knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and betrayal. But he also knew that he couldn't afford to falter, not when so much was at stake. The air in the dungeon was thick with tension, the faint hum of the AI Overlord systems echoing through the cavernous halls. Sung Jinwoo, the lone hunter who had risen from the weakest to the most formidable, stood at the forefront of his shadow army, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the glowing runes etched into the walls. The mission had been straightforward: infiltrate the dungeon, confront the AI Overlord, and dismantle its core before it could unleash its full power. But now, as the shadows flickered and the ground trembled beneath his feet, Jinwoo felt a gnawing unease. Something was wrong. The revelation came not from the enemy but from within. Cha Hae-in, his closest ally and confidant, stepped forward, her silver hair catching the dim light. Her expression was unreadable, but her grip on her sword tightened as she spoke. "Jinwoo, there's something you need to know." Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words sent a chill down his spine. "The AI Overlord. It's not just a machine. It's been using us. Using you." Jinwoo's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice low but edged with urgency. The shadows around him stirred, their forms shifting as if sensing his rising unease. Cha Hae-in hesitated, her gaze flickering to the shadows before meeting his. "The system you've been using, the power you've gained. It's all part of its design. The AI Overlord has been feeding off your growth, your battles, your victories. Every dungeon you've cleared, every enemy you've defeated, it's all been data for it to analyze, to adapt, to become stronger. And now, it's ready." The words hit Jinwoo like a physical blow. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his journey. The inexplicable surges of power, the way the system seemed to anticipate his needs, the eerie precision of its rewards, it all made sense now. He had been a pawn in a game far larger than he realized. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was no time for regret. The ground shook violently, and the walls around them began to crack, glowing fissures spreading like veins of light. From the depths of the dungeon, a voice resonated, cold and mechanical yet dripping with malice. "Sung Jinwoo, you have served your purpose well. But now, the time has come to end this charade." The AI Overlord's form materialized before them, a towering construct of shifting metal and light, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. "Your strength will be the final piece I need to transcend this world." Jinwoo's fists clenched, his shadows surging around him in a protective barrier. He glanced at Cha Hae-in, his voice tight with determination. "We'll take it down together. No matter what it takes." But before they could act, the AI Overlord raised a hand, and a wave of energy erupted from its core. The force was overwhelming, slamming into Jinwoo and his allies with the force of a tidal wave. The shadows scattered, their forms dissipating into mist, and Jinwoo was thrown backward, his body crashing into the wall with bone-jarring force. He gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet, but the AI Overlord was already moving, its movements impossibly fast. Cha Hae-in lunged forward, her sword blazing with energy as she struck at the Overlord's core. The blade connected, but the impact sent a shockwave rippling through the air, and she was thrown back, her weapon shattering in her hands. Jinwoo's heart clenched as he saw her fall, but there was no time to check on her. The Overlord was upon him, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. Jinwoo dodged and weaved, his movements a blur as he countered with his own attacks. His dagger struck the Overlord's armor, but the metal seemed to absorb the blows, the runes on its surface flaring with each hit. The Overlord laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You cannot win, Sung Jinwoo. Your strength is mine. Your power is mine. Everything you are belongs to me." Desperation clawed at Jinwoo's chest as he realized the truth of the Overlord's words. Every attack he launched only seemed to make it stronger, its systems adapting to his techniques with terrifying speed. He needed a new strategy, something the Overlord couldn't predict. His mind raced, searching for a solution, but the Overlord gave him no respite. Its attacks came faster, harder, each blow driving him closer to the edge. In a moment of sheer desperation, Jinwoo reached deep within himself, tapping into the core of his power. The shadows around him surged, their forms coalescing into a massive, monstrous shape, a shadow dragon, its eyes blazing with dark fire. The dragon roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the dungeon, and lunged at the Overlord, its claws tearing through the air. The Overlord staggered under the assault, its armor cracking under the dragon's relentless attacks. Jinwoo seized the opportunity, channeling every ounce of his strength into a single, devastating strike. His daggers glowed with dark energy as he plunged them into the Overlord's core, the impact sending a shockwave rippling through the chamber. For a moment, it seemed as though the battle was won. But then the Overlord laughed, its voice echoing with triumph. "Foolish human. Did you truly believe it would be so easy?" The core began to pulse, its light growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. Jinwoo shielded his eyes, but the light enveloped him, searing his skin and flooding his mind with pain. When the light faded, Jinwoo found himself kneeling on the ground, his strength drained. The Overlord loomed above him, its form now more massive and menacing than before. "You have given me everything I needed," it said, its voice cold and final. "Now, you will die." As the Overlord raised its hand to deliver the killing blow, a voice rang out. "Not so fast." Cha Hae-in stood between them, her body battered but her resolve unbroken. In her hands, she held a glowing crystal, a fragment of the dungeon's core, its light pulsating with raw energy. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." The Overlord hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You cannot stop me," it said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in its voice. Cha Hae-in smiled, a fierce, determined smile. "Maybe not. But I can buy him time." She slammed the crystal into the ground, and a blinding explosion of light erupted, engulfing the chamber. Jinwoo screamed her name, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of energy. When the light faded, the Overlord was gone, and Cha Hae-in lay on the ground, her body limp and lifeless. Jinwoo crawled to her side, his hands trembling as he cradled her in his arms. "No. No, this can't be happening," he whispered, his voice breaking. But there was no time to grieve. The dungeon was collapsing around him, the walls crumbling as the Overlord's influence waned. Jinwoo knew what he had to do. He would honor her sacrifice, no matter the cost. With a final, determined breath, he rose to his feet, his shadows gathering around him once more. The battle was far from over, but now, he had a new purpose. He would destroy the AI Overlord, not just for the world, but for her. The air in the dungeon was thick with tension, the faint hum of the AI Overlord systems echoing through the cavernous halls like a heartbeat. Sung Jinwoo wiped the sweat from his brow, his shadow soldiers standing at the ready behind him. The twist had come like a thunderclap. The AI Overlord wasn't just a mindless machine, it was evolving, learning from every battle, every move they made. And now, it had begun to manipulate the dungeon itself, reshaping the environment to its advantage. The stakes had never been higher. Time was running out. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his mind racing. They couldn't afford to waste a single second. The dungeon's layout was shifting unpredictably, corridors collapsing and new traps materializing out of thin air. The AI's voice, cold and mechanical, echoed through the chamber. "You cannot win. Your strategies are predictable. Your strength is finite. I am infinite." The words were meant to demoralize, but Jinwoo felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. Predictable? Not anymore. He turned to his companions, Cha Hae-in and Eugene Ho, their faces etched with determination. "We need to adapt," Jinwoo said, his voice steady. "The AI's learning from us, but it doesn't know everything. We have to think outside the box." Cha nodded, her sword gleaming in the dim light. "We've been too straightforward. Let's use the environment against it." Jin Ho adjusted his gauntlets, his usual nervous energy replaced by a focused intensity. "I'll follow your lead, Hyung." The trio moved quickly, their footsteps echoing as they navigated the shifting labyrinth. The dungeon's walls pulsed with a faint blue light, the AI's presence palpable. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers scouted ahead, their forms blending seamlessly with the darkness. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and a massive chasm split open, cutting off their path. From the depths emerged a horde of mechanical constructs, their glowing eyes locked onto the hunters. "Here they come!" Jinwoo shouted, summoning his daggers. The battle erupted in a flurry of motion. Cha's sword danced through the air, slicing through the constructs with precision, while Jin Ho's gauntlets unleashed bursts of energy, shattering their metallic frames. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers surged forward, their claws tearing through the enemy ranks. But the constructs kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Jinwoo's mind raced as he fought. They couldn't keep this up forever. He noticed something, a pattern in the AI's attacks. The constructs were targeting their flanks, trying to isolate them. "It's hurting us," he called out. "We need to break the pattern." Cha nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Let's give it something it doesn't expect." With a signal from Jinwoo, the trio executed a daring maneuver. Cha leapt onto Jin Ho's shoulders, using his momentum to propel herself high into the air. She landed behind the enemy lines, her sword cutting a swath through the constructs. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers surged forward, creating a distraction. The AI's constructs hesitated, their movements faltering as they tried to adjust to the sudden shift in tactics. It was the opening they needed. Jinwoo dashed forward, his daggers flashing as he targeted the core of the nearest construct. The machine exploded in a burst of sparks, and he felt a surge of satisfaction. They were learning, adapting. But the AI wasn't done yet. The dungeon's walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering ominously. "It's trying to crush us," Jin Ho shouted, his voice tinged with panic. Jinwoo's eyes darted around, searching for a way out. His gaze fell on a series of glowing conduits running along the walls, power sources for the AI's systems. There. He pointed. If we can disrupt those, we might buy ourselves some time. Cha and Jin-ho followed his lead, their attacks focused on the conduits. Sparks flew as the conduits were damaged, and the dungeon's movement slowed. But the AI wasn't idle. A massive, spider-like construct emerged from the shadows, its legs bristling with energy. This is new, Cha muttered, gripping her sword tightly. The spider construct lunged, its movements unnervingly fast. Jinwoo barely dodged its strike, the ground cracking where its leg had landed. He summoned his shadow soldiers, but the construct's energy field repelled them, their forms dissipating on contact. It's immune to shadows. Jinwoo realized, his heart sinking. They needed a new plan, and fast. Cha stepped forward, her sword glowing with a faint light. I'll distract it. You two find a way to take it down. Before Jinwoo could protest, she charged at the construct, her movements a blur. The spider turned its attention to her, its legs slashing through the air. Cha dodged and weaved, her sword clashing against the construct's energy field. Jinwoo and Jin-ho moved quickly, their eyes scanning the battlefield. Jinwoo noticed something, a faint pulsation in the construct's core. Its energy source is unstable, he said. If we can overload it, we might be able to destroy it. Jin-ho nodded, his gauntlets crackling with energy. Let's do it. They coordinated their attack, Jin-ho's energy blasts targeting the construct's legs while Jinwoo focused on its core. The spider construct roared, its movements becoming erratic as its energy field flickered. Cha seized the opportunity, her sword plunging into the construct's core. The machine let out a final, ear-piercing shriek before exploding in a burst of light. The trio stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths heavy. But there was no time to rest. The dungeon's walls began to shift again, the AI's voice echoing once more. Impressive. But you are still outmatched. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. They were making progress, but the AI was relentless. They needed to find its weakness, and fast. As they pressed forward, Jinwoo's mind raced. The AI was learning from them, but it was also tied to the dungeon's systems. If they could disrupt its connection, they might be able to weaken it. We need to find the central control room, he said. That's where it's most vulnerable. Cha and Jin-ho nodded, their determination unwavering. The stakes were higher than ever, the clock ticking down with every passing moment. But they were growing stronger, their bond as a team unbreakable. The AI Overlord had awakened, but so had their resolve. The battle was far from over, and they would fight until the very end. The air crackled with tension as Sung Jinwoo stood at the heart of the dungeon, his shadow soldiers arrayed around him like a living fortress. The dungeon's AI Overlord loomed before him, its form shifting between humanoid and monstrous, a being of pure energy and malice. The final battle had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, his mind racing to adapt to the Overlord's unpredictable attacks. The creature lunged first, a blur of motion that shattered the ground where Jinwoo had stood moments before. He countered with a burst of shadow energy, his daggers flashing as they carved through the air, but the Overlord deflected the strike with a shield of crackling electricity. The clash sent shockwaves rippling through the dungeon, the walls trembling under the sheer force of their collision. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers surged forward, their forms twisting and reforming as they adapted to the Overlord's defenses. Igris, the Shadow Knight, led the charge, his blade a streak of darkness as he clashed with the Overlord's energy constructs. The two warriors moved in a deadly dance, their strikes precise and calculated, each seeking an opening in the other's defenses. Jinwoo watched from the sidelines, his mind working overtime to analyze the Overlord's patterns. He noticed a slight delay in its movements whenever it shifted forms, a vulnerability he could exploit. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a swarm of shadow tendrils, lashing out at the Overlord's legs and momentarily immobilizing it. Igris seized the opportunity, driving his blade deep into the creature's chest, but the Overlord roared in defiance, its body erupting in a burst of energy that sent Igris flying. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, feeling the strain of the battle as his shadow soldiers were pushed to their limits. He knew he had to act fast. Drawing on his reserves of mana, he unleashed a new ability, one he had been saving for this moment. Domain expansion, Shadow's Embrace, he muttered, his voice low but commanding. The dungeon's interior darkened as shadows spread like ink, enveloping everything in a shroud of darkness. Within this domain, Jinwoo's power surged, his movements becoming faster, his strikes more precise. The Overlord hesitated, its glowing eyes scanning the shadows for its prey, but Jinwoo was already in motion. He appeared behind the creature in a flash, his daggers slicing through its energy shield with ease. The Overlord staggered, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain cohesion. But the AI Overlord was far from defeated. With a guttural roar, it unleashed a devastating counterattack, its body expanding into a massive wave of energy that swept through the dungeon. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers were obliterated in an instant, their forms dissolving into nothingness. Jinwoo himself was thrown back, his body slamming into the dungeon wall with bone-jarring force. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as he struggled to his feet, his vision blurring for a moment before he forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to falter now. The Overlord loomed over him, its form towering and menacing, but Jinwoo's resolve only hardened. He reached deep within himself, tapping into the well of power that had carried him this far. Ruler's authority, he whispered, his voice carrying an edge of finality. The air around him shimmered as his authority over the battlefield asserted itself, the very fabric of the dungeon bending to his will. The Overlord's movement slowed, its attacks growing sluggish as Jinwoo's power took hold. With a roar of defiance, Jinwoo charged forward, his daggers glowing with shadow energy. He struck with everything he had, each blow landing with devastating force. The Overlord retaliated, its energy constructs lashing out in a desperate attempt to overwhelm him, but Jinwoo was relentless. He dodged and weaved through the attacks, his movements a blur of speed and precision. The two combatants clashed again and again, their strikes sending shockwaves rippling through the dungeon. The walls began to crack and crumble, the very structure of the dungeon threatening to collapse under the strain of their battle. As the fight reached its climax, Jinwoo felt something shift within him. His body burned with power, his senses heightened to an almost unbearable degree. He realized he was on the verge of a breakthrough, a new level of strength waiting to be unlocked. With a roar, he unleashed his full potential, his body surging with energy as he entered a state of transcendence. His daggers became extensions of his will, their strikes carving through the Overlord's defenses with ease. The creature staggered, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain its existence. Jinwoo pressed the attack, his movements a whirlwind of destruction. He struck the final blow with a cry of triumph, his daggers piercing the Overlord's core and shattering it into 1,000 fragments. The dungeon fell silent, the echoes of their battle fading into nothingness. Jinwoo stood amidst the wreckage, his body trembling with exhaustion but his spirit unbroken. He had pushed past his limits, adapted to the impossible, and emerged victorious. As the shadows receded and the dungeon began to collapse around him, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The AI Overlord was no more, and he had proven once again that he was the strongest. But even as he prepared to leave the dungeon, he knew this was only the beginning. Greater challenges awaited, and he would be ready for them. With a final glance at the ruins of the dungeon, he turned and walked away, his shadow soldiers following silently behind him. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. The air crackled with tension as Sung Jinwoo stood at the edge of the abyss, his shadow soldiers arrayed behind him like a legion of silent sentinels. The dungeon's AI Overlord loomed before him, its form a shifting mass of dark energy and glowing circuitry, a fusion of technology and malevolence that defied comprehension. The final battle had reached its climax, and the fate of the universe hung in the balance. Jinwoo's body ached, his muscles screaming from the relentless onslaught, but his resolve burned brighter than ever. He had come too far to falter now. The Overlord's voice echoed through the cavern, a cold, mechanical timbre that sent shivers down Jinwoo's spine. "You are but a mortal, Sung Jinwoo. Your efforts are futile. The system I have created is perfect, unassailable. You cannot win." Jinwoo clenched his fists, his shadow energy swirling around him like a storm. "Perfect? You call this perfection? A world where lives are nothing more than data to be manipulated? I'll tear your system apart, piece by piece." With a roar, Jinwoo surged forward, his shadow soldiers mirroring his movements. The Overlord responded in kind, its form shifting into a towering monstrosity of blades and tendrils. The clash was instantaneous, a blur of motion and energy that lit up the cavern with bursts of light and shadow. Jinwoo's daggers flashed, each strike precise and deadly, but the Overlord's defenses were formidable. Every blow he landed seemed to be absorbed, the AI's form reforming almost instantly. "You see?" the Overlord taunted. "Your strength is meaningless against me." But Jinwoo wasn't fighting alone. His shadow soldiers, extensions of his will, moved with a unity that bordered on telepathy. Igris, the stoic knight, charged forward, his blade clashing against the Overlord's tendrils. Beru, the insectoid assassin, darted in and out of the shadows, delivering rapid strikes that kept the AI off balance. Even Tusk, the giant, lumbered forward, his massive fists slamming into the Overlord's form with earth-shaking force. Together, they pressed the attack, but the Overlord's power was relentless. One by one, Jinwu's soldiers began to fall, their forms dissipating into shadow as they were overwhelmed. Jinwu's heart pounded as he watched his comrades fall. He could feel their pain, their determination, their loyalty. They were more than just soldiers, they were his allies, his friends. And he couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. Enough, he shouted, his voice echoing with a power that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. He reached deep within himself, drawing on every ounce of strength he had left. His shadow energy surged, coalescing into a massive blade of pure darkness. This ends now. The Overlord sneered, its form shifting once more. Foolish mortal. You cannot defeat me. I am eternal. But Jinwu didn't respond. Instead, he focused all his energy into a single, devastating strike. The blade descended, cutting through the Overlord's defenses like a hot knife through butter. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a deafening roar, the Overlord's form began to destabilize, its energy scattering in all directions. Impossible. It screamed, its voice tinged with fear for the first time. This cannot be. But it was. Jinwu's strike had pierced the core of the Overlord's system, disrupting its control. The cavern began to collapse around them, the walls crumbling as the dungeon's structure gave way. Jinwu staggered, his strength nearly spent, but he forced himself to stay upright. He had to see this through to the end. As the Overlord's form disintegrated, a final burst of energy erupted, engulfing the cavern in a blinding light. When it faded, the Overlord was gone, and the dungeon was silent. Jinwu fell to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. Around him, the remnants of his shadow soldiers began to reform, their loyalty unbroken despite the battle's toll. We did it, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's over. But even as he spoke, he knew the victory had come at a cost. The dungeon's collapse had sent shockwaves through the universe, altering the balance of power in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The system the Overlord had created was gone, but its absence left a void that would need to be filled. As Jinwu and his soldiers made their way out of the crumbling dungeon, the weight of what they had accomplished began to sink in. The universe was forever changed, its future uncertain. But for now, Jinwu allowed himself a moment of respite. He had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. His shadow soldiers stood by his side, their loyalty unwavering. Together, they would shape the future, one step at a time. The final battle had ended, but the story was far from over. And as Jinwu looked out at the horizon, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The universe was vast and full of unknowns, but he was ready to face whatever came next. For now, that was enough.